Welcome to the Four Lakes Task Force webinar on instrumentation and emergency response. My name is Don Zackett. I'm a Four Lakes Task Force board member and have lived on Wixom Lake for the past 18 years. This webinar will provide an overview of some of the measurements used to monitor rainfall and detect flooding in the Tittabawassee River basin of the Four Lakes, Secord, Smallwood, Wixom, and Sanford, and also downstream through the city of Midland. It will also touch on emergency action plans and emergency response. An earlier webinar covered hydrology and hydraulic modeling for this system in much greater detail. If you are interested in an engineering level discussion, you might wish to view that webinar. Today's speakers include experts in various technologies for rainfall, river flows, flood forecasting, and public safety. Speakers we have lined up today include Danny Costello, a hydrologist for the National Weather Service River Flood Forecast Group, Derek Huff, a principal engineer at Spicer Engineering, Jennifer Boyer, emergency management coordinator, Midland County, and Bob Gates, senior engineer, Essex Partnership. Before we move on to the speakers, I'd like to provide a bit more information on the Tittabawassee watershed. Here's a map showing 3 watersheds which contribute runoff to the Tittabawassee River gauge station located in the city of Midland. Information from the Midland gauge is used to forecast flooding in Midland and the surrounding communities. On the map, the city of Midland is identified as a yellow star on the right edge of the Lavender watershed area. 3 watersheds contribute to the water seen by the Midland gauge. The uppermost watershed, Sanford Dam watershed, is shown in brown at the top of the plot. It includes all the water that runs off into the Four Lakes Task Force drainage system and terminates at the Sanford Dam. The lavender area is called the Salt River watershed. That includes the Salt River and minor tributaries that enter the Tittabawassee downstream of Sanford, but upstream of Midland and the Midland gauge. The bottom yellow area is called the Chippewa River watershed, and it consists of the Chippewa River and Pine River that drain towards Midland from the Mount Pleasant region and enter the Tittabawassee at the Tridge, which is just slightly upstream of the Midland gauge. Runoff from these 3 watersheds converge at Midland and can contribute to flood. Any one of them can contribute to flooding in the Midland area. So for instance, the Sanford Dam watershed has 40% of the area that drains into the river and can be seen at Midland. The Salt River, another 16% of drainage area that can receive rain, also detected at the Midland gauge. And the Chippewa and Pine Rivers have 44% of the drainage area that is detected at the Midland gauge. For a large uniform rainstorm, only 40% of the flooding observed in Midland may come from the Four Lakes drainage at Sanford Dam. Four Lakes Task Force consulted with the U.S. Geological Service and the National Weather Service to determine whether any additional monitors or measurements might help improve the accuracy of forecasts that are issued for the Midland and Tittabawassee drainage. Their review of the measurement locations indicated that there are gaps within the Tittabawassee watershed, which could be improved by the addition of either ground rain gauges or river flow gauges. They mentioned several locations, and the Four Lakes Task Force has adopted these recommendations and contracted with USGS for the installation of 4 river gauges at locations chosen by USGS and National Weather Service. They'll be maintained as part of the National River Gauge System and publicly available in real time to anyone that cares to view the data. Flow data from these gauges will help improve flood forecasts from the Midland gauge for our area. It's all about public safety, and the task force is moving forward as best it can to increase the public safety going forward in the future. Now I'd like to turn it over to Danny Costello, the National Weather Service River Flood Forecast Team. Thank you. Danny?
Hi, my name's Danny Costello. I'm a hydrologist and meteorologist for the National Weather Service Forecast Office in White Lake, Michigan. The National Weather Service is part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the role of the National Weather Service is to provide the official weather forecasts and warnings for the United States. Here at my White Lake office, we're responsible for Southeast Michigan, from Bay and Midland counties on south. And there are 2 other offices that handle southern Lower Michigan. One is Gaylord, which handles northern Lower Michigan, and Grand Rapids office, which handles southwestern Michigan. The Tittabawassee River shed does go in all 3 offices, so all 3 offices do have part responsibility for that watershed. The forecast process is quite complex, but I will simplify it. Basically, what we do is we gather rainfall data from radar and ground sources. We determine how much of that rainfall runs into the rivers directly by applying a soil moisture model. And then we take that data and we apply it to our hydrologic models to produce a forecast. And that forecast is expected to exceed flood stage, and then a forecast and warning will be issued for that area. Our map of local rivers and gauges around the area will show that there isn't that much up there. We have basically 5 gauges, which are USGS gauges, United States Geological Survey. We use their data and their gauges for our forecasting process. There's 1 located in Midland on the Tittabawassee River, 1 on the Chippewa, 1 on the Pine, and 2 up on the Tobacco River near Beaverton there. That's it. So those are basically the 5 gauges up there that we can provide a forecast for. The slide of rainfall radar estimates shows that the radar can estimate rainfall that's fallen, both amounts and spatially. And as you can see there's a key on the side there. This is back from May 19th. This shows the rainfall across all of southern Lower Michigan and what the radar estimates it to be. Next map of ground observations. This shows where we have automated rain gauges and manual gauges. The red dots are where we have tipping buckets or automated gauges, and those are basically located at airports around the area. And you can see in your area of the Tittabawassee River, there are 4 automated gauges. We also have co-ops or manual gauges, that is institutions or private citizens who we set up rain gauges for to report daily to us. And we have 1 over in Auburn in Bay County, 1 in Midland, or 2 in Midland, excuse me, and 1 up there in Gratiot near Beaverton. Gladwin, I'm sorry. The next slide is rainfall bias adjustment. What we do is we take the radar estimates and we look at the ground truth. And if there's a difference, we apply a bias adjustment to the radar because the radar does not always estimate correctly. And with this map, you can see when the radar bias is adjusted with the ground truth, we have a lot more rainfall fallen than what the radar estimated at that time. Once all that data is processed in the hydrologic models, we would issue a forecast. And as you can see on this graph of the Tittabawassee River back last May, the blue dots represent observed readings, and then the dashed dots to the right is what we forecast. And this is after the event that happened when the Tittabawassee River at the Midland gauge is on its way down after a crest. Interesting, you can see on the left of the graph there, the river was starting to crest or slow its rate of ascent, and then all of a sudden it turns upwards again before it crests at 35.05 feet. That is when the water from the dam breaks reached the gauge downstream. So in other words, the river probably would have crested around 31.5 feet, but with the dams letting all the water go and up cresting a little bit over 35 feet. So what are the limiting factors for increased forecast accuracy? The main concerns are distance from the radar, lack of ground truth stations, and lack of river gauges. This map of the radar range rings show the 3 Weather Service offices where they're located at and the range that the radar goes out. The further you get away from the radar, the higher the beam gets above the ground, because that's how radar works. And what that means is you can see over the central Michigan, the Tittabawassee watershed area, all 3 radar rings intersect at about 7,000 feet or higher above the ground. The problem with this is that the radar could sometimes overestimate rainfall or underestimate. It can overestimate if it's hitting melting snow high up, it'll think there's a lot of rain coming down, or it could underestimate because there's rain being formed below 7,000 feet that the radar can't see. In case last May, the radars were underestimating because there was a lot of rain being generated below the radar beam. So that's why we need ground stations to apply a bias adjustment to the radar estimates. But if you look at the map of ground observations, again, there's not that many in that area, especially directly up the Tittabawassee River itself. There are some to the west along the Chippewa and Pine, and one out there in the Tobacco River Basin, but the rest of the area up the Tittabawassee, there's nothing there. So when we do the forecast, we basically got to go with what we have and apply biases from gauges further away from where the rain's actually falling. And again, that can cause problems. We can underestimate or overestimate precip. The other problem is the number of river gauges. Right now, again, there's only one river gauge on the actual Tittabawassee River, and that's in Midland. We do have one in each of the other rivers, Pine, Chippewa, and Tobacco, but there's none on the Salt or up the Tittabawassee. And part of the forecasting is we provide a forecast for each basin, and then we route that water down to the next basin. Well, for the Tittabawassee and Midland, you can see we are running blind when it comes to water coming all the way down the Tittabawassee. There's no gauges for us to verify what our models are actually predicting. So we just go assumption that what we're forecasting coming down is correct. Those are basically the 3 main problems that come to timely and accurate forecasts for that area. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to Derek Huff from the Spicer Group.
Thanks, Danny. My name's Derek Huff. I'm a principal engineer, senior project manager, electrical engineer at Spicer Group. We've been working with Four Lakes Task Force, National Weather Service, USGS, and a multitude of other stakeholders to bring instrumentation controls, SCADA, which is supervisory control and data acquisition systems, online for the betterment of the community and the region. One of the first things that we're doing are adding weather stations. These weather stations will be located at each of the dams. This data will be shared through the internet in real time, with stakeholders. We are also looking at potentially finding other locations and funding in order to have a wider range of weather stations across the region to provide additional ground truth. That way, Danny's modeling can be more accurate as it relates to flood forecasting. The next item that we've been looking at are flow gauges. These flow gauges are of two different types. Each one of the dams has instrumentation to allow us to calculate the flow through the dam structure. So those are the calculated flows that are shown on the image on the slide here. We also have 4 locations, like Don had talked about, where we have partnered with USGS to provide gauging stations that will tell us elevation of the river or lake, as well as flow. And those locations are at the Secord Dam Road, just downstream of Secord Dam, the Salt River, the Chippewa River, and just downstream of the Sanford Dam at Saginaw Road. The Secord Dam Road gauging station equipment and the Sanford Dam gauging station equipment through USGS are currently online, and that data is available right now for anyone to see in real time. That data will also be tied in to the Four Lakes Task Force SCADA system for archival and retrieval purposes. I talked about SCADA a little bit earlier. The SCADA system, besides providing data, for stakeholders across the region, is also providing some core functions for the operations of the dams. It is providing alarming at each one of the locations. We're tracking in real time lake level. We're tracking the level of the water downstream of the dams. We're calculating flows. We're monitoring power, because if the power goes out, we need to know about it so that we can fire up generators to keep the equipment going. We're monitoring dissolved oxygen at the dams. We're looking at temperature. We're pulling in, the water temperature as well as the ambient air temperature, all of the weather related data with regard to rainfall intensity, wind speed, wind direction, barometric pressure. All of that information is coming in, as well as site security and monitoring. The camera system being installed is connected to the internet, and as such, we're able to monitor the sites in real time for a safety perspective, as well as keeping track for a record of what's going on, who's on sites, as well as making that information available to other stakeholders. As we move forward, this system, as it comes online, the internet is up at each one of the 4 dams. And we're installing equipment and instrumentation at Secord and Smallwood and doing troubleshooting right now, bringing those systems online. And we'll be having training with other stakeholders, which will include the county emergency management folks at both Gladwin County and Midland County, law enforcement, downstream communities, National Weather Service, and USGS, as we'll be sharing data with them, both their data with us and our data with them. And data will be made available to the public. There will be camera views that public will be able to click a link and be able to see what's going on at each of the different sites, as well as see lake level, flow, and current weather information for each of the dam locations. With that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Boyer, the Midland County Emergency Manager.
Thank you, Derek. I am Jennifer Boyer. I'm the Emergency Management Coordinator with Midland County. I've been with Midland County since 2016 in this role, and I've been in a county emergency management program for more than 12 years. My responsibilities include planning for and coordination of emergency response to large community emergencies, such as the 2017 flooding event and the 2020 dam failure. Emergency management and public safety partners rely heavily on weather and river forecasting in order to appropriately notify the community and respond to flooding events. The more tools we can add to our toolbox to support collection of weather data, the more accurate flood forecasting will be and able to respond accordingly. In the fall of 2020, Midland County started working with the United States Geological Survey to create a flood mapping tool for the Tittabawassee River and its tributaries. This public mapping tool will help provide clear, anticipated flooding impacts within the community when flooding is forecasted for our area. Since the Four Lakes Task Force has taken over management of the dams, coordination on emergency planning has been done with county emergency management and continues to be ongoing, keeping the safety of the community a top priority. These additional projects are able to be successfully accomplished only by the great collaboration of federal partners, the Four Lakes Task Force, county emergency management, and local agencies. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Bob.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, I'm Bob Gates. I'm a hydro professional. I've been working 40 years in operations, maintenance, dam safety, and I'm now working as a consultant with Essex Partnership for FLTF. I've been doing that for the past 6 months, and one of my key assignments has been to review emergency action plans from the voice hydro days and update them to the Four Lakes Task Force time period here. So what exactly is a emergency action plan? You all experienced the emergency, or most of you did, last year in the May 2020 flood. And behind the scenes, there was a lot going on when that dam incident was occurring. There was emergency procedures that were put into effect, and these are called emergency action plans, of course. Each of the dams, the Secord, Smallwood, Wixom, Edenville, if you would, and Sanford dams have their own emergency action plan. And they are very similar, but they are very different based on the type of facility that you have there. Each of the plans contain information that's critical for the FLTF operators and operations staff to reference and to use in order to notify the public of the emergency that's at hand, in order to protect the public, to alert the counties and their emergency folks so that people can be appropriately evacuated or warned of the conditions that are going on. So within this emergency action plan, there are specifics for everybody's roles and responsibilities, and it also details other information that can be helpful during an evacuation situation or emergency situation. Now, the critical people who have helped to create these EAPs are the FLT management staff, the operators themselves, as well as the county emergency managers, emergency directors. And their input has been helpful in modifying the voice hydro emergency action plan and turning it into something that we think is a lot more efficient and helpful for FLTF in the unlikely case that we ever have to use one again. We have two additional resources. They're from the GEI Corporation. It's an engineering firm that does dam safety. And these individuals are expert dam safety engineers that are on call for such things as emergencies or even normal conditions to respond within 1 hour of an incident to assist our operations folks. And now the operators themselves, the operations department, they have specific roles and responsibilities. But if you're an operator at a dam and the flows are rising, or you notice something about the dam, you would detect that that there's something wrong. So their first obligation is to inspect the dams, to monitor them, to answer any alarms from the equipment that Derek spoke about earlier, which talked to abnormally high rate of rise for the lakes themselves, or even the rivers downstream. We noticed that the flows have picked up, and that will key an operator to start looking closely and evaluating the situation. So an operator is to detect and evaluate the situations, call in extra resources if need be, in order to substantiate that there's an unusual condition going on. And then once they've done that and they've made a determination, they will declare a certain type of emergency, and I'll get into those next. But once it's declared, they have to take action. You can't wait. And so it's a big responsibility on the operators themselves. But in the unusual situation or case that we had an emergent situation, we would pull out the emergency action plan, go to the notification chart, which has the phone numbers of prioritized entities that they would call, such as Gladwin Dispatch Center or Midland Dispatch Center, or the directors themselves. There's a prescribed order that goes all the way through the state and federal agencies. And of course, if they see an emerging situation, we have contractors that have been signed up with FLTF to respond and to make emergency repairs so that a situation doesn't get worse. And when you get to notification, like I said, we have a notification flow chart that we would a ring down list, if you would. We have a siren up at the Smallwood facility to warn the people on Radoff Road. These homes are at a very low elevation and get flooded quite frequently, so they're one of the first groups that get notified. We also have the same thing at Secord, where upstream, actually, when you start getting high flows, the people along Lakeshore Drive seem to get flooded out early. So that is put into the plan and they are alerted early. We will have broadcast for any type of dam failure scenarios. It would be broadcast to everybody in the counties. And that would be taken care of by the Nixle system is the name that the counties have for emergency notification. We also will call, like I said, the counties and coordinate with the counties. And if there is such an incident, the counties, as they did with the May 2020 storm, will have an emergency operations center or an incident command center. And we will be part of that. We will partake in all the communications. And it's our role to provide updates as to what's happening with the dams, the flows, and weather forecasts and the like. So we are very integrated with the counties in the response. The counties have the responsibility to evacuate. FLTF has the responsibility to notify. The next slide is the next 4 or 5 slides are Google Map shots of the various facilities. And the first one shows the Secord Lakeshore Drive area. And you can see it's immediately upstream of the dam, and any type of high water that backs up from the dam would hit those homes first. So that's why they're so high on the priority list. On the next slide, it shows the downstream section for the Smallwood facility, and that's Radoff Road. And just by looking at the map, you can see with the twists and turns of the river, and you can imagine high flows that would go over Radoff Road and impact the homes there. And that's why they're notified so quickly. The next slide is of the Tobacco Spillway, which is part of the Edenville Dam. And even though the elevation of the water has dropped since we've made modifications to the Tobacco Spillway since the flood, it still could technically, in a large storm, cause issues downstream if it were to fail or have issues. Therefore, we have built into the plans alert condition notification for downstream, and as well as condition B and A, which is dam is about to fail or dam has failed. So those conditions are part of their EAP. Also in the Edenville EAP, on the other side of Route 30, we have the Edenville section of the Edenville Dam, and that's where the Tittabawassee River runs into it. That dam has breached, as most of you or all of you know, and therefore any major storm that comes down, even something as similar as the last storm, it is likely to pass through that area and not cause the dam to fail itself. So we have in the plan conditions for an alert and for B and A, but conditions B and A are very unlikely to occur, as the natural flow will pass by that facility. And then it moves itself down to Sanford, and that with that dam being out, it being breached, that flow will flow past Sanford and downstream. And there is a concern that with the high flows could pick up a lot of debris that is now in the riverbed and could come down past Edenville, past Sanford, and end up by the bridges in Sanford. And that's something that we're looking to help out with as best we can. But if we do get high flows, we feel it's important to alert the people that are associated with emergency action plan for Sanford that they could get rising waters and flooding in the downstream in the village. And with that, I thank you for allowing me to give this presentation.
In summary, the task force is taking immediate steps to improve rainfall measurements in the local watersheds and thereby improve flood forecasting for the local area. Also being developed are updated emergency action plans to further enhance public safety for residents within the Four Lakes area and also downstream to the city of Midland. Thank you for attending this webinar.